Hello everyone, and welcome to Big Ideas, Future of Cities. I'm Julia Kaiser, class of 2021 alumna from the Bachelor of Communications Public Relations program and the facilitator for today's conversation. I want to acknowledge that Mount Royal University is located in the traditional territory of the Niitsitapi and the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, and the Ayare Nakota nations. We are situated on the land where the Bow River meets the Elbow River. The traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Mokinstis, which we now call the City of Calgary. The City of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation. Now, I would like to welcome Dan Makita, who's here today on behalf of CIBC, the presenting sponsor of today's Big Ideas, Future of Cities.
Thank you, Julia. Good morning, MRU alumni, and welcome to Big Ideas, Futures of Cities. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dan Makita, Director and Team Leader of CIBC's Commercial Banking, Public Sector, Not-for-Profit team. CIBC has been a longtime partner of Mount Royal University and its alumni, and we are proud to be presenting sponsor of today's program. CIBC is a leading provider of cash management, credit, and other banking services specifically customized to the public and not-for-profit sectors. We have a dedicated and experienced team allowing us to offer a comprehensive set of financial solutions and innovative ideas for our clients. We are also proud to assist not-for-profit organizations as we realize that every dollar saved is a dollar going back to help them meet their goals. CIBC also offers best-in-class products, services, and solutions for the diversified space as well. Given the unique circumstances and opportunities that we are all facing, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. We are pleased to have MRU alumni Julia Kaiser as our host and facilitator. Julia received her Bachelor of Communications and Public Relations from MRU in 2021 and is now account coordinator with Worthington PR and Story. Joining Julia today are speakers Councillor Courtney Walcott, Kylie Woods, Mike Brown, and Damon Harmon. Councillor Walcott graduated from MRU with his Bachelor of Arts degree in History and was a teacher at Western Canadian High School up until his election to serve as Ward 8 Councillor with the City of Calgary this past October. Kylie Woods graduated from MRU with her Bachelor of Communications degree in Public Relations. A winner of MRU's Alumni Achievement Horizon Award in 2021, Kylie is a passionate social entrepreneur and the founder of Chic Geek, a nonprofit organization committed to building gender diversity in technology. Mike Brown has been associated with Calgary Real Estate and Community Building for over 15 years and is president of well-known Calgary home builder Trico Homes, and previously with the Calgary Municipal Land Corporation. Mike is also an advisor with the Dean's Advisory Council for the Faculty of Business and Communication Studies. Damon Harmon graduated from MRU's Business Administration program. Damon works with Cresa, the world's largest occupier-only commercial real estate firm for the past 18 years and is currently their managing principal. The experience and insight that this panel will provide should allow them to have an incredible insight in today's topic, and I'm eager to hear their thoughts on the future of our city. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Dan. And a big welcome to all of you watching online. And of course, welcome to our speakers here in studio. Today's program is broadcast from the Ideas Lounge, which is located in the Mount Royal Library here at Mount Royal University. For today's program, all safety protocols have been followed to ensure health and safety. In addition to our speakers, we have the AV crew here from FM Systems, a small group of staff who make today's possible, and of course, you online. Today's Big Ideas, Future of Cities is meant to be a conversation, to bring together perspectives from Mount Royal alumni and community leaders. With that, we won't leave today with just one picture of Calgary. The views expressed here today from our speakers will bring forward different priorities, shared thoughts, and various lenses and lived experiences. As Kylie said in an interview prior to today's program, today is meant to be a bit of a rallying cry because we all have a role to play in the future of this city. And Kylie, I could not agree more with those sentiments. If you at home would like to share your comments or if you have questions for our speakers, you can text them to us at 833-308-0825. Today's conversation is also being recorded. Before we get started, I have a bit of a challenge for our speakers. I challenge you to say the words pandemic, COVID, unprecedented, and pivot no more than 2 times during this conversation. Each additional mention is a $2 donation to the Students' Greatest Needs Fund. Does everyone feel good about that? I don't know if I'm gonna do a good job, honestly.
It's a risky play.
Mount Royal also just wrapped up their first ever Giving Day on November 30th and raised over $260,000 to support students. During preparation for today's conversation, we asked our speakers for some key messages. Themes emerged, and to frame everything, we'll use the following themes to kind of lead our conversation today. Those include city building, adaptation, divides and disparities, technology, and crisis. I don't know about the rest of you, but these themes, they're intimidating, they're scary, they're big, and that's really what change-making and this conversation is all about. Change-making is messy and complex, and while each theme has its own distinct issues and conversations it deserves, they're all very interconnected in some kind of way. I know we're all tuning in here in studio because we are solution-focused. We want to be actively engaged in change, bring people together, and support common goals. However, it is appropriate to ground ourselves where we are at this present time. People and the planet are fragile. I'd like to talk about one word here, crisis. In 1998, a publication by the authors of Seeger, Sellner, and Ulmer said that crisis has 3 distinct characteristics. The first one is that it's unexpected, it's a surprise. Number 2, it creates uncertainty. And finally, it's seen as a threat to important goals. I know this sounds negative, and I know all of us are looking for hope and optimism as we are going to hear that today. But I want to acknowledge where we are. The past 2 years, the hard questions that are being asked, and the things that need to change. As well, what is needed may very well depend on who you ask. I personally find the word crisis highly relative. It's definitely a word we like to avoid in the world of public relations, but I think it goes far beyond that. I think about my grandma and her experience over the last 2 years versus my own. Our experiences truly shift our priorities, and the pandemic has definitely changed that, especially for me. Councillor Walcott, you went from the classroom at Western Canada High School to a member of City Council earlier this fall. You've spent your career educating the people who are the future of the city, this province, this country. With experience like that, I'm sure you've connected with many people who experience a different Calgary and have been experiencing a different type of crisis over the last 2 years. Why do you think this is important for the future of our city?
I think, well, first off, thank you for allowing us to be here. It's really important to have these conversations. But for me, crisis is an interesting thing, especially the use of the language unexpected, right? And I think that was my experience as a teacher, is that we often view things and say they're unexpected, but really when you look at things in a historical landscape, it's actually, these events have been predicted upon, right? And I think the crisis is almost when we find ourselves in a situation that brings legitimacy to the things that many experts have predicted for a very long time. And I think that's actually a powerful moment to have in a classroom, is because a lot of times the students that I'd be teaching, they would see these issues they'd be on the front line of these issues, then all of a sudden, the rest of society finally catches up, right? And I think that's been a big shift in the last couple of years, is watching the rest of society catch up to a generation that's keying into issues that the bunch of city builders in this room are finally starting to look at addressing, right?
Definitely. It's definitely bringing that into light. Kylie, would you say you kind of experienced the same thing, especially with your work with Chic Geek?
Yeah, unexpected, I think, captures it in a nutshell. And Julia, you also said that change making is messy. So, this whole thing has been very messy. And I think, the example I'll give is that when COVID hit, okay, that's count one, Chic Geek was this nonprofit that was very in-person based, and we were kind of faced with this big challenge of, well, we're gonna have to redesign our entire organization, all of our programming, the way that we engage with our community, and that seems like an insurmountable task. And the amount of reserve and energy and optimism that you need to have, I think, in order to approach those challenges, the change making, is really important. And that comes from, you need to have a strong sense of self and self-care, but also having strong support systems. So I guess just kind of building off of that, of what Courtney was saying.
Very interesting. Now, I love that you're a public relations graduate, just like myself, an entrepreneur. You founded Chic Geek, a woman in technology, and you're a mom of 2 kids. I do not know how you do it. I'm so impressed. There's no question that the last 2 years has made us realize that we will be relying on technology to connect us to each other and information for the foreseeable future. And I find it really interesting that you've talked about moving away from what is the technology to what do we want the technology to do. And I would just really love to know more about kind of your thought behind that and how does that translate into, the future of cities and community.
So that distinction between tech and our purpose in using tech is really important. And we often get caught up in the hype that is technology. We're talking about terms like blockchain, crypto, artificial intelligence, big data. We're trying to figure out how to use these things. It's very exciting. There's a lot of opportunity there. But we need to remember that technology is a means to an end. It is not the end itself. The reason I started Chic Geek is that I believe technology is an enabler for change. It helps us open doors, start walking on the path in order to solve problems, make people's lives better, build better communities. But tech in itself is not a means to an end. It is something we need to embrace. It is a tool to help us get somewhere else. So the challenge there is to really, as individuals in our community, to be hyper-focused on problems we can solve and impact we can have in our community. Remember that tech is a way to help us get there.
Definitely. I'm curious to see what everyone else kind of has to say about that, because all of us sitting here, our relationship with technology and our jobs personally, it's changed. And it's definitely changed the way we function as a society. Has it impacted any of your work in the last 20 months here?
I'd say in a pretty significant way. With what's gone on in the last 2 years, it's interesting. You just kind of reframe when you use the term crisis. I see what came with it was opportunity, and the technology has really been an enabler of how do you capitalize on that opportunity. And so when I think of the home building business or what I work in every day, it's streamlined our business, but it's also helped us to grow the impact of our business. Customer experience is higher as a result of it. Our relationship with the trades are higher as a result of it. I really agree with Kylie. It's an enabler. I think the end product's not technology. Technology actually helps you get to the end product.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'll jump in there too. There is, it's been a very big effect on how we do business, and I'm in the commercial real estate business, and so you look at how people are using office space these days, and they're not in a large way, and so how is this going to affect us going forward? Because technology has enabled people to understand that they don't have to work from an office, they can work from home. So we'll see how that goes in the future. I think you'll still miss the people perspective, but there's some good and there's some bad that came along with it.
Yeah, and just to build on that exact idea is the people perspective too. I think the last 2 years in particular has given us the ability to really examine what, like you described, Kylie, like what do we want from the technology that we're finding ourselves using right now? And I think that's going to be a big shift, because even right now, like you just described with like office spaces, there's a lot of conversation about how do we use the physical space in this world now that we know we don't have to. So now that we don't have to, we have to be very intentional about our choices about, okay, well, why do we still want to? What areas do we no longer need to? And what's going to draw that connection between people together in those physical spaces or in the digital space, right? And for what purpose? So I think you nailed it on the head there.
The next question I have here is this creating the future we want? This kind of projection that we're onto, where we're using technology to enable our goals, meet those objectives, and kind of transform these downtown spaces, which I know we will get into later because we're all very interested on what the future of the Calgary's downtown looks like. But do you think we're on the right track? Are things headed in a positive direction?
I don't believe that technology creates anything. It really it becomes a means that helps you get to the end. And I think it's still centered on what we as a group of people want from our city. And so really technology, if you build on it, is if you truly believe it's an enabler and it's not the end product, it's still got to get down to what are people looking for. One of the things that I'm conscious of very much in Calgary is we compete globally. The whole concept of we're one single city and everything happens in the city. People can go anywhere, money can go anywhere, and so it's really using that technology to really build off of what we have as a city.
And I think to Mike's point about crisis, the flip side is that it's opportunity.
Yeah.
And so this is an opportunity for us to really reevaluate and say, well, how were things done before?
Yes.
Are we okay with that? Do we want to keep it the same way? Or is this an opportunity for us to reimagine what it can be? And the reimagining is hard and messy work, but it's meaningful.
Well, a March 2021 bank report actually spoke about the possibilities of post-pandemic urban centers and that cities have a once-in-a-lifetime chance to build back. Now, Mike, you've worked on some transformational projects in Calgary when it comes to phrases like once-in-a-lifetime chance, and there's some urgency there, I think, personally. Do you agree with that? And can you maybe talk a little bit about building back and using this really unique opportunity?
Yeah, I always find it interesting because I agree. I've been fortunate to work on some, generational projects. What makes them generational projects, though, is that they need to have the ability to adapt to whatever reality is. I think if you build a project that's only good for, one day, then you have failed. The whole idea of getting back or returning back to, I'm very forward-looking. And I think that people as a general are forward-looking, and so. It's really about how do we position ourselves for our future, whatever that future may be. I think one of the things that we have a tendency to do, though, is because of the lingo that we use, different wording, is we think that the reality we have today is the reality we're always going to have. And it's really, how do you build agility? How do you build flexibility into your community? Because you just don't know what the future is going to hold. And if anything, the last 2 years have shown us is that, in my generation, we never experienced anything like now we have. We've built up that capacity. We don't know what the next challenge is going to be. And when you're building a city, you have to build a city that's, has the ability to be agile, has the ability to adapt, because the world's going to change. And with technology, as we talked about, it's changing at a rapid rate. It's changing faster than any of us can ever imagine. And its ability as a city, how are we going to adapt to that?
Is that now for those of us that don't know here, Mike actually worked quite a bit on East Village.
Yes.
And that part of Calgary. Would you say that is an appropriate model for us to now look at going forward as being an adaptable, changeable, future-proof community?
I think the hallmarks of East Village are something that we can build off of. And, one of the early things in East Village is we wanted to build a community that was for all. It really wasn't focused on, we could have easily in the early days of East Village say, let's forget about the seniors that are already there. Let's forget about the drop-in centers that are there. Let's forget about all these different elements that are there and just build for the new, we call them urban explorers. So the hip kid that's coming along and say, well, let's just build for them. And in East Village, really our thought process at the time was the more diverse we are, the stronger we are. And I think that that's actually something, forget about the product itself, but, the people that are there and focus on that. That's what we can build off of when you're talking about future-proofing a city, is really, build off that diversity, build off the differences, not necessarily focused on having this homogeneous, we're going to have this perfect entity and it's all going to look like this. It's really our ability to be adaptable. I would say in terms of East Village today is a good example. Concept was born in the early 2000s, and then it went through the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, went through another challenge. It's gone through the pandemic. It's determining whether it's successful is going to be in its ability to actually stand up through time, not in that moment of time.
Yeah. To add on to your point, you kind of, I think you nailed the message that I've used quite often in my life, and it's that anything can become normal, right? And this idea, and it's like you described, like many people often think that what we have today, this is what it's going to be forever. Yes. It's also almost like cognitively dissonant to the realities that we've lived through so much change already. Yeah. Like the society that we built is very fluid. Yeah. And that actually fits really well with even how I view the East Village right now, is that when you describe future fit, it's not in that it was built future fit, it was built with adaptability in mind, so that as the changes come, East Village shifts as necessary, right? And it's still shifting today, and there's some amazing work that's going on there that just as in the last month and a half as councillor, have come to my attention, and it's still going, right? And that's really what should be our normal, is the fluidity of the world that we live in. We should accept that change is coming, and all we have to do is really just be supportive and be guides of it, right? Guide that change to what we want it to be.
Definitely. Now, as you literally just said, building back means things can't stay the same. And one thing we all are eager to talk about is Calgary's downtown. And I know there's been a lot about this in various publications lately, including the Globe and Mail, which ran a series, as well as conversations and podcasts. And at the Institute for Community Prosperity here at Mount Royal University, I worked on a project called Vision 2020, where we interviewed 20 people in their 20s who either were going to Mount Royal University or had just graduated, to kind of hear their perspective and what they think the future of Calgary looks like, to get that really interesting younger perspective. And shockingly, 2/3 of the students that we had spoken to did not think they'd be living in Calgary in 10 years. Which was a very shocking number. And a lot of the conversations that were around that were this idea that this vibrancy and this really exciting downtown was no more. And there was also this idea of, well, I'll have my 10-year, moment in Vancouver, or Montreal, or Toronto, I'll have that. And then I'll come to Calgary and raise a family. But it's really interesting to see that little gap there. People know this is a great place to live and know it's a great place to raise a family. I would really like to talk to Damon about this, because this is up your alley, and you talk about vibrancy a lot. And to kind of continue on this city building and this community and stuff, you have some very early stage ideas about what downtown Calgary could look like. Can you please share them with us?
Yeah, I think I don't know if Calgary's downtown has ever been vibrant. I've worked down there for 20 years, and from 7 till 7 in 2009, there was some vibrancy because the office buildings were all full, but that's been lost since 2015. Yeah.
That lunchtime is fire.
Yeah. Since 2015, with the initial downturn in oil and gas, things really started to empty out. And then we've seen it here in the pandemic with it even further emptying out. And it's really brought the question of what's our downtown offer us going forward. And so vibrancy to me is people. You have to have people around and people present, and that brings on other opportunities. And so vibrancy it requires people, and downtown Calgary has never been a place where people live. It's where they work. And so what the city is working on now is this conversion project, to take commercial spaces and turn them into residential. That's a good start, but there needs to be more. We need more purpose buildings that offer different things than they do now, not just office space. And so my focus is on post-secondaries and bringing post-secondaries downtown, and not just the post-secondaries, but the students. And students, in large groups would create vibrancy. And with vibrancy, we see opportunities for new restaurants and cafes and delis. And I can really see down the future, if we can get enough people downtown, there's going to be the need for schools. And there's going to need for not just post-secondary, but elementary through junior high and high school. And then you see maybe like the East Village has done a very good job of creating some of those other areas, the playgrounds, skating rinks, basketball courts, parks, things that people come downtown to do. Another big idea would be a field house downtown. And that would be a great amenity to bring people down and spend time, make it a destination.
That really resonates with me, because I actually lived downtown until recently, and there were no people. And it was honestly, it was really tough living downtown also during the pandemic. And it just felt kind of isolate. And I was like, you know what? Like, if I'm going to be working in my apartment, if I'm going to be spending all this time, I'd way rather go out to one of the suburbs, live there, so I can have that space.
I
And
felt like it was a high-rise jail cell.
yes, that's
you know?
exactly how it felt like. Yes. Now, this is a really interesting question. How do you think the skyline in Calgary could possibly transform in the next 10 to 15 years? And I'd love to hear kind of everyone's perspective on, that 10 to 15. If things are done the way we're talking about here, what will that look like?
I think from my perspective, there's buildings that need to be torn down. There's buildings that need to be repurposed. But I do think that there's an opportunity to continue to build more. And this is, some of the technology aspects of it. A smart city. There's going to be new technology coming in. Will change things on construction and what type of uses we have. The skyline from a visual, I think, changes if diversity changes downtown. Inclusion, if we talk about the East Village and what they've done. Diversity, not just in the types of businesses, in residential, commercial, and that'll all fuel more development in the downtown core, my belief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say, so I don't see the skyline changing, if anything. I think what'll change is the activity within that skyline. The average person doesn't, obviously you look at a building and you think, it's a pretty building from the side, you look at that, but what you're most interested in is what happens at the grade level. Like, is there a coffee shop? Is there amenities? Is there activity? And I have to believe that, in the next 10 to 15 years, and it's not, to be honest, it's not just a downtown thing. This is going to be across all cities and all cities that aspire to be great. It's really about activity and how do you galvanize activity. I always kind of just a joke, and I still believe it. I've been to some pretty remarkable events in some pretty shitty buildings in my life, and what memorable to me is the event in itself. It's not the building. I think we get too fixated on the building form. It's more what takes place. That's what's going to make it exciting. And so I'm excited with the transformation of downtown, but I am also super optimistic that it becomes, a little bit. Well, I'll look down like ants, and I'll just see activity. What that building form is, I'm a little bit indifferent to it, but it's the activity itself.
Mm-hmm. I was actually going to say something very similar in the sense that we've built a downtown that's kind of squared off from the rest of it, like the concept of expanding or shifting. It's a challenging idea in the geography of what we've built down there. So my anticipation was that the skyline is not going to change much with regard to building shapes. New buildings will go up, old buildings will come down for sure. But I think the big change is going to be the life that exists within those buildings. And I have this, just one of my favorite times of day is driving west Memorial, coming down Memorial toward downtown in the morning. You see the lights, just like the sun just come off all the glass buildings, right? And my hope is that in the future, it's at night. You will see in each floor of these 30, 40 floor buildings that there'll be lights on and there'll be people in them. Not all of them, right, but interspersed throughout so that it's no longer just empty space after 7 o'clock, and it's actually space that is lived in. And, in many ways, you see specks of life all across the skyline. It's going to be a big shift.
That's beautiful. That's gorgeous, just to think of all those lights like that.
Julia, we're talking about, I love Damon's work around reimagining things, the conversation here with Mike and Courtney about, it's not so much about the skyline, more about the activity, but I think one thing that we're also missing is that in this process of reimagining, we are trying new things. And we don't always get it right the first time. And that we will make design mistakes. We will try to convert something and it might fall flat. And how are we as a city going to, pick up that mistake and look at it and learn from it? Or are we going to judge ourselves and judge those who are involved? I think that is a really important piece of this discussion about what is the future of Calgary is how do we learn from mistakes and grow from it?
Absolutely.
I've often thought Calgary is a bit like a teenager. And as a teenager, we're not quite that, like it's such a young city. Like it's a large city, but it's a young city. And it's that ability for us as an entity to actually go from that teenager hypercritical to more established, more of an adult where you're able to actually stop back, learn from your mistakes, go about it again, be comfortable with your mistakes, and that's where, as a city, we're just at the point of that transformation.
I love that analogy. Now, Councillor Walcott, I really want to talk about how the city's recent declaration of the climate emergency kind of plays into this, and how we can change and adapt the downtown part of Calgary, and how do those kind of play together? What do you see for that?
There's been, for several years, I think what ends up happening a lot is we end up reacting instead of being proactive in the ways that we approach how we build, partially just because there's economics involved, there's ideologies at stake. There's quite often so many different things that come into play when we're building something. What the city's role in this process is, or at least my role in what I'm going to try and convince 15 other people to get on side with every time, is to take a serious look at how from the building block stage, you can establish what is the guiding light for what it's going to become, right? Now, the best part about it is I'm not the builder, right? And that's like one of my favorite things to say is it's not my job to do, it's my job to hear from people, to take into account as many voices as possible and turn it into policy to guide that building block. And then hand it off to someone else, hand it off to the people in this room, to be honest, and say, okay, now build. And it's a very powerful thing. So the city's declaration of a climate emergency in many ways is just that. It's setting the table for people to go ahead and build with a very long-term sustainability in mind. It's like that's where the experts come in, though, is that right after that, okay, we've done this part here, and now you're going to find that people are exceptionally creative in moving forward once the foundation block is in place, right?
Super cool. Super interesting stuff that we're talking about here today. Now, Mike, I want to come back to you because before this here, you talked about a tale of two Calgarys.
Yep.
One that's more familiar to those who've lived here for a long time, and then one that the rest of Calgarians know. Can you talk a little bit about those two different realities?
Yeah, my big kind of rallying cry, and to be honest, I think it fits into your crisis/opportunity bit, is you hear the story of folks that have, and I grew up in Calgary. I've lived a very good life in Calgary, but folks that'll say, well, if we could just get back to as good as it used to be. And then you'll have people raise their hand and say, well, that wasn't really good for me. It may have been good for you, but it wasn't good for me. And where I worry about a little bit, and even the dialogue we have, is that we need to build a big tent that both those cities can feel at home in. Whenever we have conversations and we talk about change, the challenges is you'll lose people when you talk about change. But we need them to feel that they are part of it, because I think that one of the things that is going to make us stronger as a city is our diversity. When you get into talking about technology, you talk about great cities, and you talk about we don't want to lose half of our community through that dialogue. We want them to feel that they're a part of it, and vice versa. We need to recognize that. The great times in Calgary's history, the 80s or 70s, it wasn't great for everyone. And we need to recognize that we need a city that actually everyone can be successful in, not just a part of our city.
For sure. I know, Kylie, you're not a native Calgarian, and you also had some challenges kind of moving into Calgary and trying to find your place and your spot. Can you speak a little bit to that and maybe what you've seen and how you've seen that change as you've become, more accustomed with the city and all that?
Yeah, I think it builds off of, Mike's, this kind of the tale of two cities. And, I'm originally from Saskatoon. And when I came to Calgary, I had this vision that people in Calgary are, 40-year-old white men that are cowboys, and that's not me. So this is going to be a spot that is a step along the way to somewhere else. And, I've ended up staying, and I'm building my life here, and I'm committed to that now, because I see that second vision of what Calgary can be, and I feel like I can be a part of actually building that, and that's very exciting. But I have had many moments in my life where I walk into a room and I feel like, oh, I don't belong here. And partly it's my own insecurity, and I'm looking for an external validation and someone to say, hey, we want you in this room, come and be a part of what we're doing. And And part of it is just my own personal growth of finding ways to build my own confidence so that I can walk in there and I can say, I have value to add here. So there's a personal journey there too. But, you know, that conversation about where's that middle ground? What is that Calgary that will embrace all, not just some? That's a challenging one, because that some of those questions I think will bring up conversation that questions who is privileged and where was power previously, and not everybody wants that change. Not everybody wants to give it up and find something that is more equal, and that's going to be one of the biggest things that I think as a city we're going to have to overcome.
And it's actually really interesting you say that, because in the Vision 2020 project that I worked on with the Institute for Community Prosperity, very, very similar sentiments among students being like, Calgary is cowboy town, and just not feeling this connection between this, you know, white older males and, you know, being a young, bright-eyed student stepping into this new city, if they're coming from a small town or another city, and just not really being able to find that connection and that place of belonging and community. It takes a while.
Yeah.
If we could shift to, it's too bad, you know, as a city that we've created the dynamic or dialogue that it's, you know, you're either one or the other. You know, it's mutually exclusive. You're either a cowboy or not a cowboy. And I would like Calgary kind of, you know, part of its reinvention is the opportunity is to be the place where it's welcoming to all. And it's where you can come and thrive no matter where your interests lie. And if we can set ourselves apart, I think that'll actually help us on our attraction of people, our attraction of investments, all the things that are help us attain all the visions that we have. It's, you know, I'm on the board of the Stampede, and it's a big discussion that I constantly have is this, you know, how do we adapt? And how do we, and I have friends of mine that'll say, well, you're on the Stampede, that's bad. And I'm like, no, it's not bad. You know, it's part of our fabric. It's part of who we are as a city, but it's not the only part of who we are as a city. And we have to allow others, you know, Kylie's a good example. We should celebrate that as what you're involved in as equally as we do anything else. It shouldn't be a scenario and say, well, this is good or this is bad. And that's part of when I say the tale of two cities is to shift away from that dialogue of one thing's being good, one thing's being bad. In my definition of a great city, it has everything. It has something for everyone. It's not that it's about one thing for one group. It's about something for everyone.
Yeah. To build on it, to be honest too, and you like nailed it for me with the Stampede. Yeah. So it's like, I'm from Toronto myself, so when I first came out here, my major cultural events were Caravana. Yeah. Right. So to come out here to Stampede, I had immense culture shock. Yes. And when we think about diversity, especially within some of the conversations we're having with Calgary's very business focused. Yeah. And I think trying to remind people that diversity itself is not just a buzzword, but actually just a huge opportunity for expansion. Yes. Right. I always go back to Black Panther. Right? Like quite often, I always circle back to Black Panther, this idea of this all-black superhero movie, and how the rationale behind not producing it was that there was a belief that there was no market for it. Yeah. But the reality is that there was no market because no one created a market for it. No one ever gave it an opportunity to show that there was a market for it, and that reaffirmed people's belief about what the market was, what we had here, right? So if Calgary only ever shows Stampede, then it will always be Stampede. But if someone steps out and creates something new, all of a sudden we create the opportunity for it. And again, like, you know, I go back to Black Panther, it's like all of a sudden we realize that there's an immense want and a need for that diversity, that people are just waiting for someone to step in and provide the opportunity.
Well, and people want, like, I honestly, we all want to be a part of special moments. Yeah. And so if you think of what Black Panther was a special moment. It's a stop where you go. And I think it's where people are most surprised. You think about a movie, the movie that interests you the most is the one they had the least expectations for, and then you went in and it overachieved. People want that in their life too. They want that special part where they're like, wow, this is remarkable. And it's not tied down to any one thing. It's really personal. And so I think that as city builders, that's our job, is to build those special moments.
Yeah. I'm gonna steal that line.
Yeah.
You're gonna see it in the campaign material 4 years from now.
Now, people go to and stay in cities that meet their needs and align to who they are and who they aspire to be. In preparation for today's conversation, Mike noted that people and money are like water. Yeah. They can go anywhere. Yeah. Some of the research from Mount Royal University's Institute for Community Prosperity speaks to a bit of a disconnect between what Calgary is and what is actually important to the people who live here, especially the young people like me. I specifically think about how some of the conversations my friends and I have about the actual layout of the city. And I'm from the Southwest. I'm very proud to be part of that part of the city. That's where my family lives and all of that. But there's this really messed up connotation that I'll have with people in my community about these weird barriers between north, east, south, and west. And it almost feels like going to northeast Calgary is like a bit of a road trip. And it shouldn't be. It should be just one full community. And I think what's happened, and the conversation I'm having with my peers, is that we have our community in Southwest Calgary, and that's that. And it's hard to like break away from those four segments. And I just feel like there needs to be more alignment between these communities in this city. There's this disconnect. I don't know if anyone can speak to that, or some of you in the room who work with community building and stuff. But is that a challenge you face?
Well, great cities have many different products. And so it's interesting when I talk to some of the folks I grew up with, they knew South Calgary or they knew North Calgary. I'm very fortunate I know all of Calgary. I've been my whole life. The Northeast is a very good example of this amazing piece of, if you think of fabric, it's amazing. And we need to celebrate it more. 17th Avenue itself, if you go up and down it, you can go to these remarkable restaurants, mom and pop shops, like all these things. People, you will travel to another part of the world to go to something like that we have in our own backyard. And I think we just have to do a better job of telling the story to Calgarians in terms of how it's not about creating this homogeneous one product, it's about diversity of product. And if I travel to Toronto, I want to go to little parts of it, I want to see it. Calgary has all that. We just have to figure out a better way to celebrate it.
Yeah. This goes back to your skyline question, actually. And it's, I think one of the many future visions for this city is to actually create more than one.
Yeah.
Right. We have built a quadrant system. There's a lot of things that separate us, and to try and, instead of trying to create almost a single unified city, you want to do that through your culture. But when it comes down to placemaking, you really want to build out these special communities that have something that is unique to them, because each of these communities is unique. Each of the quadrants has something. So it's like, how do you fill it out? What are the gaps that are missing in this community that you can find in another one? How do you create little activity centers all over the city so that even if you are in the Southwest, to be honest, what does the Northeast have that's going to make that a destination for me, that I'm going to want to go there? And sometimes it is the narrative, sometimes it's the story, and then sometimes it's what we built, and ensuring that we are taking advantage of how unique these different spaces are and investing in them equally.
Right.
Which is sometimes, I think, what we don't see right now in our city building process, is that investment it's inequitable across the city. But that is something that we have the ability to change, especially the people in the room.
Do you agree with that there, Damon?
I do, yeah. And I also think that if we had a better center to bring everybody together, then you would spread the word a little bit more about some of these awesome places. And if you're staying in your own community and not reaching out and running into other people, you can't learn unless, it's better to learn from word of mouth, in my opinion, versus reading. So
Absolutely. I want to talk about your initial call to action and some of the notes I read before this. And it was really about kindness and connectivity, which I think is a really great place for us to end off on before we go to the questions and comments from everyone watching at home. But what would you like to add to that before we head into everything else about?
I think, Canadians as a whole are some of the most friendly people in the world, and I would love to see Calgary lead that. Being downtown, I see a divide between the have and the have-nots, and it's hard to see. And I think it takes everybody you're not going to change the have-nots in some of the ways that we all want to, because it's a slow process. But kindness can help and just make things better for everybody. And that's something that I think everybody can have a hand in.
I have one last question for Kylie. I said that was my last one, but I actually have one more. And my question for you is for myself and all my fellow recent graduates that are joining online today. What do you want us to do? What can we do as these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed graduates ready to take on the city?
I think it's really important to harness that energy and turn it into action, and know that this is a time in Calgary right now where that action can have a really big impact in shaping the next 10 to 15 years. So, but acting can be scary. I was talking to Courtney about why he moved into politics from teaching, because, I think personally, I think politics is a really scary place to be. Entering that very public ring opens you up to a lot of judgment. And, anytime you put yourself out there, whether it's to create a company, to join a movement, to start something, that judgment is there. And it requires a lot of courage in order to continue stepping forward. So, my call is to have courage, harness your energy, and turn it into something actionable.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much. So we do have a few questions that have come in from our audience online. So I'd like to bring those up here, if we can get them on our little screen. All right. So what are your thoughts about replacing all public transport and delivery vehicles with EV? This could be an amazing carbon offset for Calgary and place us as environmental leaders out of all cities in Canada.
I take this one. Yeah, I got this one. It's the language that I often always have to kind of come back to is the just transition, right? It's about making sure that when we are transitioning, we aren't leaving people behind. And the move toward electric vehicles on a local scale, on an international scale, it comes with some weight to it, right? That's really heavy with that I carry actually quite often. For example, when we look at what it takes to build like an electric vehicle, like battery, right? We got to realize that entering into this scale means that we're also entering into a very global community on how we build the things that bring with us our convenience. On the second thing, you have to really, I really want to look at our local infrastructure, right? The electricity that comes along with it, the grid that we have, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just circling here down to the third thing, which is really energy poverty. It's about realizing that when we make this transition, this fight for electric vehicles as the solution, there will be a lot of people left behind because of the aging infrastructure that we've built, the ownership of property, and the inability for people to transition toward what would be required for this. So you take all of these things in mind, you realize that there's a transition in place, and it's about making sure that as we're moving toward this equitable future, we're doing it with as much justice in mind and equity in mind. And it realizes the opportunity that we all have. Such a huge opportunity, and the amount of programs that'll be required. I'm so excited about it if we're thinking about it that way. And that's how you make sure that you don't leave anybody behind in this transition. And I'm looking forward to seeing that work through. I could speak to specific policies, but that's not today. That's not here.
Many companies abandon their offices in favor of remote working. Can we learn more about how City Council is participating in the plans for revitalizing downtown and the unused office space?
All right. I think I'm going to pass this one off, actually, because it's in a lot of the work that we do, it's in partnerships with the private industry as well, too. So
yeah, there's a greater downtown plan that's been put together by City Council, and that is got a detailed look. And I encourage you to read it and download it, because there's some great ideas in there. But it is about how do we repurpose buildings, and how do we create more green spaces, and how do we make it a more friendly city for people to be in and come to, as far as a downtown core.
Yeah.
So
We need to, just to support what you're saying, I liked, to get back to, I think it's unbelievable that we don't have a post-secondary. We have post-secondary presence downtown, but not like Ryerson and Toronto or others. Like we got to get there. That's like low-hanging fruit. We've got to get there as a community. But I would even go a little bit farther. We have to, I appreciate what this council has done in terms of showing leadership and setting a vision. Okay, the next thing is we got to figure out how to get the private sector dollars unleashed. So you start moving a little faster. Mm-hmm. Where I worry a little bit about the downtown discussion is if it all comes down to government doing it, we won't get there fast enough. We need to go faster. And it's really about putting those tools in place so the private investment starts coming in. And that's going to be, it's just building off of, I'm very excited about the plan for downtown, but the proof is going to be not in the plan. There's the shelves of, if you ever want to have fun, go read at the different city plans going back many, many years. It's about action and how do you move on it as fast as you can. Because that's the reason I brought up, people and money are like water. This is why it's a crisis, this is why it's opportunities. We have to capitalize on this stuff right now.
And to build on that, the final thought is that's actually the plan, right?
Yep.
Like that is the idea behind City Council's motivation right now is we know that if we just leave it to the market, right, there's a heavy cost that is associated with revitalizing our downtown. So it'll go slow because truthfully, private industry is just not flush with cash that they're just going to infuse into that space. So how do we activate it? We have a major infusion of public money to support this so that people start working now versus later. And that's the strategy that City Council is bringing into it. It's we'll kind of set the table again for you. We'll put our infusion of cash while we can, and then that activates as many, way more private industry ready to go in and build.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, I think we have time for one more question here, maybe two. How do the panelists think the city can convince students to stay in Calgary once they graduate? Ooh, I like this one.
Well, the premise is obviously you want the students to stay, and I get that, but is part of one's journey through one life have to be in one city? I think about for my own kids, what I want for them, I want them to just live an interesting life. And I think Calgary's part of that life, but I also think other parts of the world are going to be part of that life too. And I don't think we have to be fearful of that. I think we just have to make ourselves, as attractive as we can. So, go away, have an experience to come back. The world is small, like it's, if anything, over the last number of years. And so for me, I want to, answer the question. I want Calgary to be as attractive and as interesting as they can, but also I don't think if somebody goes out as part of their life journey, goes to another part of the world is necessarily a bad thing. I think that actually can be quite a good thing. I kind of tip my hand. My personal interest is just to live an interesting life and do interesting things, and that's what I want for my kids. Yeah.
I think that is one piece of it, absolutely. It's that we can't hold on to them too tightly and say you have to stay here. But to some of the earlier conversation, Damon made a really good point about connection. And Mike, you were talking about creating moments. And when I think about my reason for staying in Calgary, it really was about the people who are here, the network and community I had, my family that was around, and that kept me here. Those were my roots into this city. So how do we create more moments of connection, more relationships, more moments that really define people's lives, and that's an exciting thing to talk about.
Go first,
I add
no,
real
please
quick
do.
here. The conversations I've had with the post-secondaries in Calgary are saying, we like the idea of downtown, but we're not coming downtown to do the city a favor. It has to be a value proposition for us. And so looking at work integrated learning, in your fourth year, if you could be in a downtown campus, integrated with the businesses, integrated with all these new opportunities that when you graduate, you could get a job, or you could start up a new technology firm, or you're an entrepreneur that wants to do something. That's a value proposition, I think, that any university wants to see is the jobs that come out of it. And so we have to create those opportunities. And I think we're working our way towards that.
That's perfect, because truly my only idea for how you keep people in a city, short-term, long-term, comeback, etc. It's about having a city where the reputation is that space is available for you.
Yes.
Yes. And I actually tip my hat to Kylie, to be honest, because it's creators. That's the place that you want. That's the place that I want Calgary to be. It's entrepreneurs, it's creators, but it's also in the many public service industries where it's like you find yourself realizing that Calgary is a place where you can live the life you choose to live, right? Not just the life you have to live. And that's a powerful thing. And right now, when you look at downtown, nobody is choosing to go downtown because there's nothing there yet, right? And that's the idea. We're changing it. We want people to be attracted to it. We want people to be attracted to Calgary because they come here because they know they can carve out space for themselves. And if that is our culture, a culture of you having the ability to create space for yourself or even join in the space of others, that's a city that's going to hold on to people, and that's a city that's going to draw people to it.
Well, and it's crazy because that's everything you've described is legit, and that's what makes Calgary unique. And it actually goes back to our history. It's not that's where we have examples of that, of people coming from, making good life. We have that, and so for me, it's really about how do you build off. Like, you still have to put a node to the who we are as a city, but we have to use that as a platform that we can open ourselves up and then much greater. So no, I like why you said that.
Okay, we'll do our final question here. If it can just pop up back on the screen. Okay. When people talk about Calgary, what are some things that you want them to keep in mind or start talking more about? I feel like this whole conversation, but what are some, maybe last little things we can leave people with?
Challenging.
Yeah, I think when I want somebody to think of Calgary, I want to see it as a place where no matter who you are, you can have a good life. And it's in a life by your own definition. That's where I want for our city. It's what I want for the city I want to live in. That's what I want for my kids. That's what I want for my friends. Just basically, I don't want to be in the position where I said, a good life looks like this. I think it's up to that person and for them to really feel like they can make a good life.
We've been talking a lot about all the change that's happening and the challenges and the opportunity that come with it. And I think there is this theme around adaptability, to Mike's point, that agility. And I think to be active participants in our city, to be part of that change, we really need to embrace that. And it comes down to being very curious about all sorts of problems. Even the way, Courtney, you responded to the question about electric vehicles. It's like, well, there's the problem, there is an easy solution, but let's ask some more questions, be really curious so we understand, what are all the implications of this? And so, I want Calgary to be a city where we are known for being curious.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
Now, I see all of your questions, but unfortunately, we have run out of time for today. I think we could all stay all day and answer them and keep talking about this. But what I've learned is that we all really have this role in the future of the city. And talking about Calgary and advocating for Calgary and the roles that we all play professionally and personally, we all really shape what it is that's around us. In doing so, we need to take a broader view than just our own, which I think this conversation has really executed quite nicely. I feel so lucky to have been part of this conversation, and I agree that this must continue into the new year in 2022. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. This has been a real pleasure for me. I also want to thank our sponsor, CIBC, for presenting today's show, as well as I also wanted to let everyone know that Big Ideas is a new series, so there is more to come from the Office of Alumni Relations here at Mount Royal. Through programs like these, we aim to bring alumni community and university leaders together because we're all solutions focused at the end of the day. We're change makers who solve big ideas and help solve local challenges. I would like to thank our virtual audience and to all of our supporters in studio today. We're going to be sharing our survey link with you now through the live stream, so please take 2 minutes to share your feedback. Be well, take care of each other, be kind, and we will see you all in 2022.